Hello, my name is Tiffany and welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I've done a proper thrift flip, but I am finally back with another upcycle by Little Toe where I take old forgotten items and give them a new life. If you like sewing and DIY videos, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It is officially spring and I love all things floral, so in today's video, I'm gonna show you how I turned this dated two-piece set into this perfect for spring matching set, so let's get started. I thrifted this set for $4 and the style is not very flattering on me, but I love this fabric. You can see here that the skirt actually fits me pretty snugly in the waist, and the top reminds me a little bit of a scrub top. I get so excited as the weather gets warmer and my Pinterest is currently filled with all of the floral outfits, and I came across this Agua Bendita two-piece set, which is very much my aesthetic, so I want to try to recreate this, but first let's take a quick look at all of the details. Here is a close-up of the top, and it's got a little bit of a halter top cut with straps that tie along the shoulders. It also has a curved hem that's a little more cropped in the center front. For the back, there are 3 buttons along the center back as a closure. Moving on to the skirt, the top section is fitted and the bottom is gathered. There's also this curved seam here. In the back, again, there is this curve that mimics the front, and this skirt has a high-low hem. I'm going to start with the top, and I'm going to be using this free pattern from Mood Fabrics as a base. It is a pattern for a dress, but I'll only be using the bodice portion of it, and it actually works out pretty well because the cropped shape of this dress in the front is pretty similar to the shape of the Agua Bendita top. I will be making modifications to this pattern, but I'm going to show you exactly how I do it. Here is the pattern for the front bodice, and based on my measurements, I've gone ahead and traced it out in a size 4. I wanted to quickly mention that I started using medical exam table paper to trace out my patterns, and this is just the kind that they lay out at a doctor's office before you sit on the examination table, and this has been working out so well for me, and it is a little bit cheaper, actually a lot cheaper than using parchment paper to trace out my patterns, which is what I was using before. I'm just placing my pattern onto my cutting mat so it's a little easier to see. I'm going to start by extending the shoulder seam, and I'm using the original shoulder seam as a guide and just extending it towards the center front. Next step is to draft the new neckline, and you can freehand this, but I actually have a top that fits me really well and I like the neckline of, so I'm going to use this as a guide. I'm placing my shirt onto my pattern, making sure they line up along the center front using this pin as a guide. I'm also making sure to line up the shoulder seams, and then I go ahead and trace out the neckline. Next, I'm going to freehand a new armhole, creating more of a halter top silhouette. Once I'm happy with how it looks, I go ahead and cut out the pattern. So this pattern has 2 darts, a waist dart as well as a bust dart, but I want my top to only have 1 dart, so I'm going to show you how I combine these 2 darts. I'll start by drawing a line in the center of the waist dart. Then I'll do the same on the bust dart as well, making sure that the lines intersect. Now I'm going to cut as close as I can to the intersecting point, making sure that I don't cut all the way through. Next, I'm going to shift the 2 points of this dart here so that they meet, and I'll tape this in place. This closes up the waist dart and widens the bust dart. Now that I've joined those 2 darts, my pattern now has a bust dart that comes from the side seam, but if you look at the original top, it has a bust dart that comes from the armhole. So now I'm going to show you how I make that adjustment on my pattern. I draw another line, this time coming from the armhole to the intersecting point from before. Again, I cut as close to the point as I can, making sure that I'm careful not to cut all the way through. This time I want these 2 points to meet, so I shift this over until the points overlap. Then I tape it in place, and I'll go ahead and trim this off, creating a clean side seam. A quick disclaimer that I am self-taught and I am not a professional pattern maker, so this might not necessarily be technically correct, but I learned through trial and error, and this is just what works for me. Next is to crop the pattern. I measure 3 inches from the bottom of the side seam and make a mark. Then I measure and mark it 3 inches along the bottom of the center front. After that, I freehand this curved hem, cut away the excess, and here is the pattern I'll use for the front of the top. Moving on to the back. Here is the original pattern from Mood Fabrics, and here it is traced out in a size 4. The original pattern included seam allowance along the center back, so I drew a line 1/2 inch away to use as a guide. Just like the front, I start by extending the shoulder seams. Then I line up the center front of my top to the guideline that I drew and use it as a guide to mark out my shoulder seams. I want the back neckline to be higher than the front, so I mark about 1 inch higher than the front. Now I'll freehand the neckline as well as the armhole. Final step is to crop the pattern, and just like the front, I'm cropping this by 3 inches, and here is my modified pattern for the back. I went ahead and made a mock-up using the pattern I just drafted, and you can see here that I've just attached the shoulders with some safety pins just so I can put the top on to see if I need to make any adjustments. The top actually fits pretty well, but there are a few things that I'm gonna adjust, and the first is the neckline. I think it sits a little bit too high, so I'm just gonna use my marker to mark out where I want it to sit instead. The top is also a little bit loose on me along the waist, so I'm gonna go ahead and take it in a little bit along the darts in the back, and I'm also going to take it in a little bit along the side seams here, and that should help it fit a lot snugger. I'm gonna go ahead and make these adjustments, and then based on that, I'll draw out the modified pattern. Here is the final pattern I ended up with for the front bodice, and here it is cut out of the fabric. As you can see here, this was cut on fold. Next is to sew the dart on both sides, and you should have something that looks like this. Moving on to the back. Here is the pattern for the back bodice, and here it is cut out of the fabric. Using the same pattern, I cut out a mirrored piece. Next is to sew the darts, and it should look something like this. Before I sew these to the front, I'm going to add buttonhole loops to the center back here. I decided to make some skinny straps to use as the buttonhole loops, and I have a step-by-step on exactly how I make this in a previous video, so I'll make sure to link that down below, but here is a close-up of the straps that I made for this top. I take the strap and fold it in half, creating a loop which I place along the center back. Important to note that the loop side is on the fabric and the open ends of the strap are not. I'll sew this in place and repeat this on the bottom and top as well. Here is a close-up of the loop sewn in place, and again the loop side is on the fabric and the open end is along the center back. Now I'm just placing my front and back pieces right side spacing. I'll sew these together along the side seams, and you should have something that looks like this. Following the same steps, I made a lining piece which I'm placing right side spacing. Starting from this point, I'm going to sew along the center back, along the neckline, stopping at this point. Then I'll start another stitch from here, sew along the armhole, ending at this point. Next, I'll sew from this point along the neckline to this point. I'll do the same on the other side as well, making sure that I don't sew any of the shoulder seams. Here's what it looks like sewn together, and you can see that I've left this shoulder seam unsewn, and I've done the same for the rest of them as well so that I can insert the straps. To make the straps, I cut a long strip that I'm folding in half right side spacing. I'll sew this together, and this is what it should look like now. I've also pressed it so that the seam is in the middle of the strap. Here is a close-up of that. Now I'm going to sew this end together. Here it is turned to the right side and pressed. As you can see here, the seam is in the center of the strap, and this is what the other side looks like. Following the same steps, I went ahead and made 4 more. To attach the straps, I feed them through the opening left along the shoulder seams, and they are all sandwiched between the shell and the lining. I'll sew all of these straps onto the top with a straight stitch. The straps are now sewn in, and I'm just tucking them in between the layers so I can finish the hem of the top. I'm going to sew both layers together along the hem here, making sure to leave a small opening so that I can turn the top to the right side. Here it is sewn together, and I've also gone ahead and clipped any curved edges so that everything lays nice and flat later. From the opening that I left, I go ahead and turn the top to the right side, being careful not to accidentally rip out any of the stitching along the hem, and it should look something like this. To close up this opening, I'm going to top stitch along the bottom here. I got a little bit carried away while I was top stitching that little opening closed, and I decided to go ahead and top stitch the entire top, so here is a close-up of what that looks like. Here are the buttonhole loops turned to the right side, and next is to sew on the buttons. I decided to make fabric cover buttons to use on this top, and they were actually super easy to make. I have a short tutorial on exactly how I made them, so I'll make sure to link that down below. This is what the buttons look like sewn on, and here is the finished top. Moving on to the skirt, I'm gonna break it down into 2 parts, the top section of the skirt and then the bottom section of the skirt. I'm gonna start with the top section, and I'm gonna be using a skirt pattern that I drafted for myself a while ago, but I did find this free pattern from Mood Fabrics that would be great to use as a base. Here is the pattern I'll be using for the front of my skirt, and I've gone ahead and traced it out. I'm just placing it on my cutting mat so it's a little easier to see. I measure 5 inches down from the top and make a mark, and then draw a line across. From that line, I measure 3 inches down and draw another line. Now I'll freehand a curved hem, and once I'm happy with how it looks, I cut it out, and this is what I'll use for the top section of the front of my skirt. Here is the pattern for the back of my skirt, and once again I trace it out. Now using my new front skirt pattern as a guide, I trace out the curved hem, and here is the pattern I'll use for the top section of the back of my skirt. Just like the top, I made a mock-up to make sure that everything was fitting nicely and to see if I needed to make any adjustments. Here is the pattern for the front of my skirt. I went ahead and cut it out, and this was cut on fold. Moving on to the back. Here is my pattern piece, and here it is cut out. Then I cut out the mirrored piece. Next is to sew the darts, and this is what it should look like now. I place my front piece right sides facing, and I'll sew these together along the side seams. This is what the top section of the skirt should look like, and following the same steps, I made a lining as well. Moving on to the bottom section of the skirt, it is essentially a gathered skirt with a high-low hem, but I don't have that much fabric to work with, so I'm gonna make mine with a straight hem. Here is the piece I cut out for the front of the bottom section of my skirt, and you can see that the top is curved to mimic the curved hem of the top section of my skirt. I'm placing my back pieces right sides facing, and the only difference is that the back is cut along the center back. Now I'll sew these together along the side seams, and I'll use French seams for this. I love using French seams since it hides all of the raw edges really neatly. I went ahead and sewed a basting stitch along the top of this section of the skirt to create these gathers. Next is to attach both sections of the skirt together, and I'm just placing them right sides facing and pinning in place, making sure the side seams line up. I'll sew these together, and this is what the skirt should look like now. Next, I just fold this so that the top section and bottom section are right sides facing again and flipping the whole piece over. I place my lining so that the right side of the lining is facing the wrong side of the gathered section. I'll pin this in place, and I'm essentially sandwiching the gathered section in between the lining and shell layers of the top section of the skirt. I'll sew these together, and here is what the skirt should look like at this point. This is what the inside looks like, and you can see that all of the raw edges are neatly hidden between both layers of fabric. Moving on to the next step, which is to sew on the waistband. Following my measurements, I cut out these 3 pieces. I did iron-on interfacing on all of these for added stability. I'll go ahead and sew these together, creating the shell waistband. Following the same steps, I made a lining waistband which is not interfaced. Starting with my shell waistband, I'm placing it right sides facing on the top of my skirt and pinning it in place, again making sure that the side seams line up. I'll go ahead and sew these together. Here is what the waistband looks like sewn on, and this skirt is really starting to take shape. As you can see here, the back of the skirt is still open, so I'll go ahead and sew the center back together till this point, leaving the top open for the invisible zipper. I'll sew in the zipper, and here is what the skirt should look like at this point. I've showed this a lot in my previous videos, so I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm going to go ahead and sew the lining waistband to finish the top of the skirt. The waistband is sewn on, and this is what the skirt should look like now with all of the raw edges neatly hidden, which makes me very, very happy. Last step is to hem the skirt by folding over twice and sewing. I also wanted to show you that I used bias tape to hide the raw edges along the center back, and here is the final outfit. I love all of my thrift flips, but this may be my favorite one so far. I think this skirt is so flattering, and the floral print on this is just gorgeous. I love the high neckline, dainty bow straps, and I'm so happy with the way the fabric covered buttons turned out. I'm definitely going to be wearing this a lot this spring. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I am definitely more of a warmer weather kind of gal, so I really enjoyed making this, and I am so inspired to make more spring and summer outfits. If you want to see more photos of this outfit, I'll be posting them on my Instagram at Little Toe. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments what you thought about this outfit and if you have any suggestions of what I should make next. As always, thank you so much for watching.